We need to go down to 6, I think, Shannon. Almost done. You know, when I read this book, and one thing he brings up at the end of this book is how ordinary people can make a great difference. And that's so true in our world. You know, I don't know that we'll ever change the world, or our names will ever be written in a history book as somebody that did a great thing, or will ever be listed as a martyr for Christ, but I think we can all make a difference in the lives of people around us. And I think if World War II and Nazi Germany taught us anything, it's that ordinary people can make a huge difference in the world. And I think that's true for all of us, for everyone in here, that we all have a role to play in this world, in the lives of our families, in the lives of people around us. And when I look at the people who made these differences tonight, these are people who weren't maybe astounding people, but people who stood for God and who made a great difference. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran minister in Germany during World War II, and if you ever get a chance to read any of his books, I would suggest you read The Cost of Discipleship. But he was a man who basically was opposed to Hitler's idea of what religion should be in Germany under the Nazi rule. He didn't believe that they stood for what the church believes, and early on, he became opposed to that. He was actually in America, and he actually took the last steamship back to Germany before the start of the war. He was a German citizen, a Lutheran minister. After the war started in Germany, he would have been eligible for the draft, but he was able to escape that because his brother was part of the German secret police, and he got him a job as a secret police, and he actually was able to travel outside of Germany to other countries, and he was actually serving as a spy, but he became a double agent. He was working to get Jews out of Germany, and part of that work that he did to get Jews out of Germany was giving them paperwork that actually he gave Jews paperwork that showed they were part of the secret police, so they were able to get out of occupied Germany. And in the midst of that, eventually he became arrested, him and his brother. He was in prison for 2 years. If you're familiar with World War II, towards the end of World War II, there was an attempt made on Hitler's life. It was called Operation Valkyrie, and it was a deal where they put a bomb in his lion's den, a den that he that was supposed to be a secure den, a place that he went to on the Polish border, and that, of course, that was unsuccessful, and he really was not involved in that plot, but because of that plot, he eventually was executed just days before Berlin fell. He was hung just days before Berlin fell to Russia, because the Russians are the one who actually came into Berlin. Just days before that occurred, he was actually hung by Hitler and died as a martyr for Christ. But in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, he says, cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance. Baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ. He was a man who stood against Hitler, against Hitler's idea of how he could control Christianity. He stood for his belief, and he died for his belief. He says, no man in the whole world can change the truth. One can only look for the truth and find it and serve it. The truth is in all places. You know, when I think of men like him, men that were ordinary people, and the difference that they made, it's astounding. I don't know if you're familiar with who Corrie ten Boom is. Corrie ten Boom was a watchmaker's daughter, actually became a watchmaker. Quite a fascinating story. She was a watchmaker's daughter, and they hid Jews to keep them safe from the Germans and help them in kind of an underground railroad to get out of Germany. If you've ever read the book The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, it's that story of how they did that. She eventually was imprisoned in a concentration camp, her and her sister Betsy, if you've read that story. And Betsy would wind up dying in a concentration camp, but Corrie would survive, eventually became a U.S. citizen. She has some tremendous faith as she navigated the things that navigated that time in history. It's a tremendous book. If you ever get the chance to read it, it's a book that will definitely move you. She said, Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it empties today of its strength. Now, I love one of Corrie ten Boom's quotes is, for many of us, prayer is, prayer is our spare tire, right? It's something that we take out only when we need it and not all the time. She was an amazing woman of faith, did amazing things within her life, just an ordinary person, a watchmaker's daughter who, because of the situation, because of the time in history, did some tremendous things that, I don't know if you know this guy, Zachariah Botros. Have you ever heard of him? Zachariah Botros he's a Coptic priest, and he is so opposed to Islam, and he's wrote books talking about the problems with the Quran and the problems with Islamic text. He's a man who's had multiple attempts on his life. He's been stripped of his Egyptian citizenship. He broadcasts on radio network. He's 89 now, I think. He broadcasts on radio networks daily, opposing Islam, opposing what it stands for. He's converted many Islamics to Christianity. At one point, he was considered the #1 enemy of Islam. He's a guy that stands up for Christ, that stands up for the truth. He's a guy that teaches that and preaches that. And just one of those guys, ordinary guy that stands up and has done tremendous things. I think when you think about those people, this is a statue on the west end of Westminster Abbey, that these 10 spaces were vacant for centuries. These 10 little clavicles, or whatever you want to call them, were vacant for centuries. And they stand above the statues of truth, mercy, justice, if you look at the whole picture on the Westminster Abbey. And these were vacant. And in 1989, they put 10 modern Christian martyrs in these spots on Westminster Abbey. 10 people who came to the conclusion and put them on that. One of those people, I think the 7th from the left, or 6th from the left, is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So he was one of those people that actually got placed on those statues on Westminster Abbey. I don't know if you can read this or not, but the first one is Maximilian Kolbe. It's a Catholic priest who volunteered to die in place of another prisoner in Auschwitz, at the concentration camp in Auschwitz. He volunteered to die in place of another prisoner. I'm not going to get these names right. Manchi Masmarella was an Anglican catechist killed by her own parents for her faith in 1928. The next one is an Anglican archbishop assassinated during Adi Armeni's regime in 1977. The next one's Grand Duchess Elizabeth, a Russian Orthodox princess who became a nun and was killed by the Bolsheviks in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. The next one is Martin Luther King Jr., Baptist minister, civil rights leader, assassinated in 1969. Oscar Romero from El Salvador was a Catholic archbishop, assassinated in 1980 for advocating for the poor. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor and theologian, executed by the Nazis in 1945. Esther John was from Pakistan, a Presbyterian evangelist, murdered in 1960 for her faith. Lucien Tapati was in New Guinea. It's an Anglican teacher killed during the Japanese invasion in 1941 during World War II. And Wang Ziming in China was a pastor executed during the Chinese Cultural Revolution in the 1970s. So many times we think about people who die for faith, who die for Jesus, who are martyred for the cause of Christ, and we think about people centuries ago. We think about people in the Bible. But it's important for us to remember that every day in this world, there's people who are standing up for their faith in Jesus Christ and dying for their faith in Jesus Christ. People who are just like me and you, ordinary people that are in terrible places in the world, that are undergoing terrible persecution, that have stood up for something that they believe in to the point that it costs them their life. And these 10 are just a few examples of the hundreds and thousands, millions of Christians over the years who have been martyred because of their faith in Jesus Christ. It's sobering to me when I think about these people who gave their life for something that they believe in so fervently. In Daniel chapter 3, there's a story of 3 men, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 3 men who were exiles in Babylonian captivity, carried off from their homeland by the Babylonians to the land of Babylon to become servants of the king, right? And if you've read the book of Daniel, you know the story. And Nebuchadnezzar built that big statue, right? Statue of gold on the plain of Durham. And he said, everybody, when you hear the sound of the horn, when you hear the sounds, everybody has to bow down and worship the God that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have built. You know, it's funny, every time I hear this story, I grew up on Johnny Cash when I was a kid, and there was that Johnny Cash song, right? They wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't burn. And every time I hear this, I hear that song playing in my head. But you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to do that, didn't they? But I love their refusal. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. He called them up, right? Called them up. He says, you know, I'm going to give you one more chance to bow down. And they looked at him and they said, we don't even need to give you an answer. But I love what they said. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, I love that faith. Even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. You know, they understood that they could not bow down to that golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had put up, and they knew it could cost them their lives. So King Nebuchadnezzar, you know the story, right? Heated the furnace, what does the Bible say? 10 times hotter. So hot that the people that threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were burned up, throwing him into the fire. And when he looked into the fire, he said, oh, there's a fourth man in the fire, and he looks like the Son of God. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the furnace and said their clothes didn't even smell like smoke. God had saved them from the furnace because of their faith in God and their ability to stand up for him in a society that refused to acknowledge him as God or as king. And wasn't that an amazing story? You know, we talk about people in the Bible that stand up for what they believe, that stood up to the point of death. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were those people. In Daniel 6, Daniel knew the document was signed, right? Remember that story? Daniel Lion's Den. We all know that, right? Our great VBS story, right? They tricked him. They tricked the king. Said anybody who prays to or worships anybody but you, O king, be put to death, thrown into the den of lions. And yet Daniel, he knew, didn't he? That's the interesting thing about Daniel 6. Daniel knew the document was signed. He knew what he was doing, knew exactly what he was doing. And yet he walked into that house, to his roof. He opened the windows. You know, he could have left them shut, couldn't he? He could have shut those windows. He could have went into an inner room and faced Jerusalem where nobody could have seen him do what he was doing. But Daniel didn't do that. Daniel opened his windows and got on his knees and faced Jerusalem as any good Jew would do. Faced Jerusalem, opened it, got on his knees, and prayed 3 times a day, giving thanks before God as he had been doing previously. He would not stop, even though the king said the decree had been signed. Daniel would not stop, would not bow to that because he knew that's not who he was. It's not who he was. When I think of great people that stood up for their faith, and I think about us, you know, we've got it pretty easy here, don't we? Right now, pretty easy. I mean, there's not many of us who are going to get persecuted because we're Christians. As a matter of fact, in the world we live in Henrietta, Oklahoma, most people will applaud us for being Christians, not criticize us for being Christians. But there's plenty of places in the world where you would be criticized, you could be punished, you could be killed simply because you're a Christian and believe in Jesus Christ. You know, in 1 Corinthians 4, Paul says, For I think God has exhibited us apostles last of all, as men condemned to death. When you read the New Testament and you read these guys that Jesus was the closest to, and you see these men who literally gave up everything to follow Jesus, everything. Isn't that what Peter said? He says, we've left families and houses and lands to follow you. These men had given it all up to follow Jesus. For what? To die. They followed him to die, didn't they? They followed him to be martyred in many different places, in many different ways. We know traditionally these men died terrible, terrible deaths. Andrew died on an X-shaped cross. Peter died crucified upside down, right? Bartholomew was skinned alive. Many of them were boiled in oil, beheaded. Paul was beheaded. Peter crucified. These men died terrible, terrible deaths. They left everything to die. Everything to die. You think how important faith is, how important eternity is. What we give up for our faith is just minimal compared to what people over the centuries have had to give up to serve God. You and I meet in a nice building. There's nobody outside to arrest us. Nobody's going to harm us for being here. Nobody's going to criticize us for being here. And yet I know tonight, as you and I meet, there's people meeting in this world tonight that are meeting in rooms, that are behind locked doors, that are scared for their lives because if they're discovered, they could be killed simply for doing what me and you are doing, sitting here tonight. And we can't fill a building, can we? Can't fill a building. And yet in the world where people are getting killed for Jesus, the buildings are full, the people are coming to Jesus in record numbers because of the persecution that exists. Christians are terrible with prosperity. We always have been throughout history. It's always been the case. In times of prosperity, we're terrible. We don't look towards God. We don't think we need Him. We don't desire Him. We don't think we need what He has to give us because we think of terms of this world and not in terms of the next. And yet so many people over history have not done that. They've looked in terms of eternity, in terms of what's next. Paul says we're condemned to death because we become a spectacle to the world, both to angels and to men, Paul says. And that's a very difficult passage to understand. Both to angels and to men we become a spectacle, Paul says. We are fools for Christ's sake, but you are prudent in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are distinguished, but we are without honor. To this present hour, we are both hungry and thirsty and poorly clothed. We are roughly treated or homeless, and we toil, working with our own hands. When we are reviled, we bless, and we are persecuted, we endure. When we are slandered, we try to conciliate. We have become as the scum of the world, the dregs of all things. Even until now, I do not write these things to shame you, but to admonish you as my beloved children. Why did Paul write that to him? He says, because you've got it good here. You've got it good, but we don't have it good. We're putting up with all this for you, and you should be thankful for what you have. When Jesus called Paul in the book of Acts, if you read that, I think that's such a powerful thing that when he sends Ananias to the house of Saul at that time, right? To the house of Saul. And what does God tell Ananias? He says, go, I'm going to tell him what he must suffer for my name's sake. And yet Paul became a Christian anyway. Paul died a terrible death for his faith. Paul was beat multiple times, beat with rods. He was stoned and left for dead. And yet Paul never quit. Paul never wavered. Paul preached Jesus Christ until the day he died in a Tamarind dungeon in Rome when the Emperor Nero cut his head off because of his faith. Things like that should move us, should motivate us to get past our pettiness when it comes to the gospel, past our little problems that you and I think we have. We're scared to share the gospel because somebody might say something bad to us or think bad of us. There's people in the world who, if they share the gospel, could die, and yet they still share it. They still share it. And you and I are scared of what? We're scared of what? Somebody thinking poorly of us or somebody saying something to us because of our faith? This is a story. It's an old story, and if you Google this, it's sometimes called the hat on the box. That's kind of what the story's been called over the years. It's called the hat on the box. It's a neat little story, and it's probably kind of hard to read. So he boldly purchased a bus ticket for a 12-hour ride from Ho Chi Minh City to the inner regions of Vietnam and climbed on board with a box filled with Bibles. He knew there would be checkpoints along the way, but he hoped that somehow the guards would miss this box. As he prayed and waited for the bus to depart, he was surprised and more than a bit worried to see a uniformed police captain aboard the bus. The captain walked toward the Bible smuggler and selected the seat next to him. Strangely, the captain quickly settled into a very deep sleep, but just before the captain fell asleep, he gently rested his hat on top of the box of Bibles. While the smuggler watched and waited, the captain slept. It wasn't long before they reached the first checkpoint. As the Christian expected, the guards boarded the bus and began checking the identification papers of each of the passengers. Then the guards asked the passengers to open their bags while they inspected the contents. When the guards reached the Christians' row on the bus, they glanced at the box, at the captain's hat resting on top, and at the slumbering captain, and without a word, they quietly moved on to the next row. Repeatedly during the next 10-hour checkpoint after checkpoint, the police captain slumbered, and the guards quietly moved by without ever checking the box. You know, when I think of somebody smuggling Bibles, to be killed for smuggling a Bible. You ever thought about that? You know, we talk about smugglers, right? Drug smugglers. Used to be cigarette smugglers on the Canadian border, right? Used to smuggle cigarettes across because of the tax going into Canada. We talk about drug smugglers, and we talk about human trafficking, people who smuggle children or women or other people across human trafficking. And we think about that, but how many times do we think about people who would be killed or prosecuted or thrown in prison for smuggling a box of Bibles? In 31 countries in this world at least, the Bible is illegal. You cannot possess, you cannot own, you cannot transport, and you cannot sell a Bible in 31 countries in this world. If you do that, you could be arrested, you could be jailed, you could even be sentenced to death for carrying a Bible in one of these countries. You and I, brethren, we're very blessed. We're very blessed in this country we live in to have the freedom that we have to do the things that we do. And we take it for granted. We really, really, really take it for granted. We should be thankful. We should be appreciative. We should think, what's my role in this? What's God calling me to do? Am I scared to share the gospel because I might lose a friend? Somebody might say something bad to me. Somebody might call me a Bible thumper, or maybe might call me a Jesus freak or a fanatic. Are we scared because of those words? We think those words will hurt us or damage us? Are we fearful to profess our faith in Jesus Christ because we think someone we know might think less of us? Do we go along because we're scared not to because of people's thoughts concerning us? We should be ashamed. Every time that we run into those win situations, you should think about the people in this world who have died, who have given their life for Jesus Christ. And I think when we do that, it humbles me, it sobers me. And I realize how little in this life I've really given up to be a Christian. I really have not given up very many things to be a Christian. I've gained way more than I've ever given up to serve Jesus Christ. And when I see these people who have given everything, even their very life, for the service of Jesus, I'm very ashamed of myself. Because many times I failed. I failed because I was worried about words, worried about what people might think, worried about what my friends might think about me because of what I believe and the faith that I hold dear. We should never, ever be ashamed. We should never back down. We should never not speak the words of Jesus Christ because of fear, because so many people in this world stand up every day, and talk about Jesus Christ, knowing it could be the last thing that they ever talk about. I think it's sobering to me. You know, you can go online if you get a chance, if you want to. You can go online and you can go to Voice of the Martyrs and you can read so many of these stories. You know, I don't know if you've ever been on that website, if you've ever been associated. I think there's actually a couple of books in the office, Voice of the Martyrs books. But if you go on that website and listen and read those stories, and I know some of that's to raise money, I understand that, but read some of those stories on that website of people today, people in our world today who are dying, who are having their property confiscated, who are living in fear because they believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and it will really make you think about how little you and I pay to be a Christian. We just don't. And I guess it's good. It's a blessing. It's where we live. It's a world that we live in. But don't you think, because of the world we live in, that maybe God expects a little bit more out of us than what we do? I do. And I think we need to find a way to make that happen in the lives of people that are around us. It's very sobering to me. Thank you for your time this evening. I hope that you have a blessed week. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand.